It was summer, I believe the day after the 4th of July, and my husband and I were in the middle of a cross-country road trip. We were driving through Texas, and for any of you who have driven across the entire state of Texas, you know that it is very long and very barren. Sometimes, we'd go hours without seeing anything at all, and the towns we did pass through didn't consist of much more than a rusty old gas station and a few dusty little houses. Looking out the window, you would swear you were just driving through the same 5 miles of desert again and again and again. I had started getting a headache, and my husband suggested I take a quick nap to get rid of it. I remember allowing myself to doze off as I watched the beautiful colors of a desert sunset. The slowing of the car woke me up, and the first thing I noticed was how dark it was. I believe it was around 10 p.m. My husband had stopped at a gas station with a small shop. He told me he was going to go grab us some food and asked if I needed to pee. Knowing I might not have another chance for quite a while, I went into the shop to use the restroom. Both the men's and women's restrooms were down a little hall from the open area of the shop. I was groggy and tired and realized how badly I needed to pee, so I shuffled into the restroom. As I made my way the short distance from the door to the nearest of the two stalls, I made eye contact with a woman coming out of the only other stall. She didn't quite look homeless, but she was definitely messy looking. She had wild gray hair, almost shoulder length if it hadn't been sticking out every direction from her head. It looked like it hadn't seen a brush in weeks. She was wearing ragged-looking clothing, a pair of ill-fitting black workout shorts, and I remember noting her foam flip-flops. Several layers on top, one of them being a large purple and green coat. Keep in mind that this is Texas in July. The jacket was just hanging on her shoulders, crooked like she hadn't bothered to take a few more seconds to put it on correctly. She was carrying something in a tied-up plastic grocery bag. I gave a quick smile as our eyes met, and she just stared at me in return. Then her face turned wild and intense-looking. Her eyebrows were set as if she was angry, but her eyes had a wild, alive look. She looked at me like she was hungry, and this was when I felt the first tinge of something wrong. I tried to brush it off. She waddled over to the only sink, and I took my time shutting the stall door, because something about her posture in front of the mirror struck me as odd, and I was trying to figure it out. She was standing with her body more angled toward me, but her face was turned to the mirror. Her body was tensed, legs slightly crouched as if she was ready to act. Her hands were not up by her face or trying to fix her mess of hair or even being washed. They were at her sides, elbows also slightly bent. I wasn't sure why, but I suddenly felt uncomfortable. I regretted leaving my purse and cell phone behind. I shut and locked the stall door and took my time using the toilet. I wanted her gone before I left the safety of the stall. I stayed there long after I had finished, but the woman was still there, so I waited longer. Finally, I heard the smacking of her flip-flops as she made her way to the door. I heard it open and then slam closed. The door was pretty heavy and had slammed the same way when I had entered. I stayed for a moment and allowed the wave of relief to wash over me before I reached for the lock, then paused, fingers only an inch from the lock. I stayed as silent as I could manage to confirm what I had just thought I heard. Breathing. The woman had only pretended to leave. At this point, I was scared and confused. Why had she tried to trick me into thinking she left only to stick around and be as quiet as possible? I knew something was very wrong, so I stayed in the stall even longer, and this time it must have been at least 20 minutes, but I had no way of knowing for sure. I could tell from the direction her breathing was coming from that she had positioned herself in the far corner, right next to the door, but far enough that I couldn't see her feet. Finally, I heard her leave. This time, I waited a few minutes to make sure she hadn't tried her trick again. I slipped out of the stall, quickly washed my hands, and rushed down the hallway to the store. It was pitch black outside, and I had no idea where she was. She couldn't be far. A large man was checking out at the register, so I waited near a window display until he left the store and quietly slipped out the door behind him. Sure enough, crouched right outside the front door is the woman. She seemed surprised as she stood and turned away, walking quickly around the side of the store. My husband was waiting in the car and asked me if I was okay since I had taken so much longer than usual, and I said I would tell him all about it once we were away from that store. The Redditors that previously read about my experience had many theories, but the two most common were that she was a druggie that wanted to mug me, or that she worked with sex trafficking. I'm open to any of your theories. I tried to see if there was anything in the news from around that time, but I couldn't figure out exactly where we were when this happened. When I was younger, each summer and almost every New Year, my family would pack the car and go on a road trip to visit family in Mexico. We never had any problems until one particular trip when I was 8. Like every road trip before, we left our home in North Texas around 6 p.m. to reach our destination the next morning. So around 2 a.m., we crossed into Mexico. And that's when things got weird. When you're on the only stretch of freeway in the middle of the desert, you don't tend to freak out about having the same car behind you for miles. It was practically pitch black outside our car windows, the only visible shapes being the dotted stars and the eerie silhouettes of the cacti. We'd been in Mexico for about an hour and still had a few more to drive, and I remember sleeping but still being semi-conscious of what was around me, because I didn't have the skill to really fall asleep in a car. So when my mother suddenly spoke my dad's name, I heard her. "Miguel, that car behind us. It's been behind us since we left Laredo." My dad peeked at the car and shrugged off my mother's tension. "A lot of cars use this road. He's probably going to Reynosa or another city." And he left it at that. Despite his sureness, my mom kept a wary eye on the car behind us. By this time, my siblings and I were hyper-aware of the car and entertained ourselves with watching the car through the gaps in the luggage that blocked the rear window. We got tired pretty quick. "He's getting closer," my mother noted, and we turned to watch as the car inched closer and closer to ours. "He's too close, Miguel." And she was right. By this time, the car was practically pressed against the rear of our car, and on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, with another few hours until daylight, it was downright scary. We couldn't do much. My dad didn't slow down, didn't stop, and he didn't speed away either. He just drove, and the car followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense we had ever experienced. The car would ease off sometimes only to press its blinding headlights against our rear once more. Like he knew he was freaking us out and enjoying it. It was during one of the periods that the car had pulled away that my mom spotted a police car up ahead parked on the side of the road, and she didn't miss a beat. "Pull over, right in front of the police. Pull over right now, Miguel." And he did. The car kept driving. I wonder how confused the policeman must have been as he watched my dad park our car right in front of him. The policeman came over and asked what was wrong, and my mother urgently told him everything. The car, the way it followed and taunted us. The policeman took her claims seriously and told us how people were victimized and had their cars stolen on these empty highways by thugs and criminals. Then he offered to drive behind us for a while to make us feel safe. We drove off with the police cruiser behind us, relieved. Until about 10 minutes later when we saw something that confirmed the policeman's words and my mother's worst fears. We saw the car pulled over on the side of the road, waiting. I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving to the Midwest. My friend Amy and I would spend many days exploring the remote corners of New Mexico, discovering abandoned ghost towns, and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon in March 2010, we were traveling from Ruidoso to Albuquerque. Always up for exploring, we took a back road rather than traveling the more direct highway. One leg of our journey had us on NM55. It's a remote, tiny two-lane highway. We loved those types of roads up until that day. This part of New Mexico is flat and desolate desert. You can see for miles. There is virtually nothing except dirt and rock between towns, and towns can be miles apart. So we were on NM55 going north. After a few minutes, we saw a white pickup truck up ahead of us going the same direction. Suddenly, he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. We were about a mile away from him, and as we got closer, we began to get uneasy. We could see no reason for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than come up to him and have to stop. We were about a half a mile away from him when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway, but his truck was still pointed the direction we were going. We tried to relax a little. Surely this guy was a rancher or something. Maybe he was checking something on his land. As we passed him, we noticed a few things. There was only one person in the truck, a middle-aged guy who never took his eyes off us, and he was talking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back onto the highway and started following us. But he never got too close. He would get to within a few car lengths, and then drop back a little, and then speed back up again to within a few car lengths. We were getting nervous. We realized how alone we really were. We had seen no other traffic on that road, and we hadn't told anyone about our great idea to take this detour. We checked our cell phones, and neither one had a signal. Typical for remote New Mexico, but scary given our present situation. Amy was driving and speeding up while I frantically checked the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic. There was no other road. We had to travel this one to get to the next town. Turning around to go back the other way didn't seem like a good option. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming towards us. He was going very, very slowly, maybe 20 miles per hour, if that. This pickup was old and beat up, whereas the one behind us was newer. Amy had us up to 75, and we blew by the old pickup. As we passed it, we saw that it was another middle-aged guy, and he was talking into a walkie-talkie. After the white pickup truck passed him, he pulled a U-turn and pulled in behind it. As we watched all this, we could see the white pickup truck guy talking into his walkie-talkie. No doubt these two knew each other. We were being deliberately followed, and for the first and only time in my life, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road. We truly thought old, beat-up pickup guy had set up a trap in the road, and our vehicle would be disabled somehow. We talked about driving into the fields, but this was obviously their territory, and we were afraid of what would happen if we went off-road and got cornered. So, we stayed on the highway. By now, the white pickup truck guy was right on top of us. We could see him talking into the walkie-talkie, and he stayed right on our bumper. The old beat-up pickup truck guy was right on top of him. The three of us sped down the highway. The white pickup inched closer. His maneuvering and edging closer made it apparent that he was trying to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got within inches of our back bumper. Amy floored it. We were passing 80 miles and edging up to 90. The road was flat and deserted, but any little thing going wrong would have been catastrophic. We absolutely were not going to slow down or stop if we could help it. The white pickup pulled into the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think of was that he wanted to pass us and get in front of us. If he got in front of us and his buddy was behind us, then we'd be boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of us. Our only option was to off-road it. Should we risk it? Could we speed through the desert and make it to safety in one piece? As we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument, and it pointed towards a road on the left. And right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled out of that road and onto the highway in front of us. As we came up on the blue pickup, we saw the plate said U.S. Park Service. We looked at each other and then looked behind us. Both pickup trucks did U-turns and went the other way. We followed the blue pickup to Mountain Air and then made our way to Albuquerque. I don't know exactly what those guys' intentions were, but they weren't good. There is something seriously wrong out there. I notified the state police, and they said they would keep an eye on things. This area is very near Belen, New Mexico, which is where Tara Calico was abducted. It's also about 100 miles from Elephant Butte, which is where David Parker Ray had his little secret torture laboratory. We didn't put all that together until later. Even though David Parker Ray had died by the time this happened to us, we do believe that there are others out there like him. And whoever abducted Tara has never been caught. Or maybe we came into meth lab territory. But since this happened on an actual highway, rather than a backcountry road, I tend to discount the meth lab theory. Whatever is going on out there, it's not good.